Dear listeners, you are listening to the podcast series of the Forum of Central and Eastern Europe of KU Leuven. In our 20-minute conversations, we discuss the latest academic research on the region. I am Maryna Shevtsova, a senior FWO research fellow at Lions KU Leuven, and it is my big pleasure to interview our guest today, Dr. Elżbieta Olzacka. Dr. Elżbieta Olzacka is an assistant professor at the Center for Comparative Studies of Civilizations, Jagiellonian University, Krakow, Poland. She has received a master's degree in sociology and in Russian studies and a PhD in sociology from the Jagiellonian University. She was a visiting scholar at the Institute for European, Russian and Eurasian Studies at the Elliott School of International Affairs, George Washington University, USA. Her interests include theories of war and conflict from sociological, anthropological and cultural study perspective. And for 2 years, from 2014 to 2016, she conducted a research project financed by the Polish National Science Center dedicated to the cultural context of the civil war in the Republic of Tajikistan. Her current research includes Ukrainian cultural mobilization and cultural policy in the context of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Elżbieta, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, and thank you for having me.
Elżbieta, you are one of two representatives of the Polish part of the team of the project Ukrainian Heritage, Challenges and Opportunities for EU Heritage Diplomacy in Ukraine, that addresses the role of cultural heritage in the EU's external action. There are 15 universities in this consortium, and as I mentioned, you represent Polish side, and except of being Polish yourself, you also study Polish case. So, in addition to this obvious reason of your own background, what are the other reasons why Polish case is worth studying? What brings you to study it, and what can you tell us about it?
Yes, Poland presents an interesting research case for three main reasons, and not only because I'm from Poland, as you said. First of all, during the initial weeks and months of the full-scale invasion, Poland witnessed a massive mobilization that led to various aid initiatives. Poles opened their hearts and homes to Ukrainians, and especially at the beginning, it was not just an empty slogan. This solidarity was facilitated by the fact that what was happening in Ukraine was not distant, was not anonymous, because many people, almost everyone, knew someone or someone who knew someone who needed help. And the same logic operated in Polish museums and cultural institutions. The more many of these institutions had cooperated with Ukrainian institutions, with Ukrainian conservators and artists in previous years in joint projects. So in March 2022, Polish cultural institutions established an informal committee for Ukrainian museums. And this committee began transporting materials to Ukrainian museums and cultural institutions. It must be mentioned also that in the initial phase of the Russian aggression, both Ministry of Culture of Ukraine and the Ukrainian cultural institutions were not well prepared for the war, for the crisis situation. There was lack of instructions of how to safeguard cultural property, how to evacuate collections, and there were also lack of materials needed to secure and protect these collections. So during the initial weeks of the war, it was most important to deliver these protective materials, to secure and to evacuate collections. And the first deliveries was mainly driven by private and very informal contacts within institutions and between personnel of Polish and Ukrainian institutions. A second reason is that the Polish Ministry of Culture and National Heritage actively supported this grassroots mobilization. The Minister of Culture established a special unit. It was financed from the government. And it was called the Polish Support Center for Culture in Ukraine. It was established also in March 2022. And the center began to coordinate these dispersed activities within the Polish state cultural institutions. The Polish government also became an important actor in building an agreement to help Ukraine at the international level. It was mainly within the European Union, but also in the Friends of Ukraine group at UNESCO. Also, there were many publications and various information campaigns to draw attention to the scale of destruction of Ukrainian cultural heritage, and it was a call for increase the funds to protect this heritage. Also, representatives of Polish cultural institutions emphasized their experience in post-war reconstruction, and this experience was connected not only to the post-war reconstruction of the Polish cities after the Second World War, but also more recent experience in Iraq and Afghanistan, and Polish specialists, especially archaeologists, participated in these missions. And finally, Poland rapidly developed into an aid hub simply because the geographical location and a shared long-distance border with Ukraine. International aid, both humanitarian and military, travels through Poland to reach Ukraine. And that's why Poland is a natural partner for many foreign initiatives. So, for example, many American and European museums contacted with Polish initiatives to provide the necessary materials to Ukraine.
Yeah, sounds like a Polish example or Polish case is interesting indeed for said reasons, but it is what it is. So to tell our listeners a little bit more, now when, of course, the situation is not over yet, is ongoing, but still you mentioned that the ministers, for example, and leaders of the museums were not prepared. So for other countries in the region and over the world, as many other conflicts are taking place, what conclusions at this point can be already drawn from Polish experience? What can be maybe extrapolated and, used?
Yes, at the initial phase on the invasion, these voluntary activities were very important. They were based on the sense of mission and sense of responsibility, and this network of informal contacts were very important. Also, it seems to me that flexibility is a key word here, and the ability to adapt to dynamically changing situation. However, it became essential to establish structures and strategies based on long-term planning in the next months of the conflict to facilitate regular and more coordinated help. And it's also beneficial when there is some center to coordinate or at least to map all dispersed initiatives. And within Poland, this coordination worked very well. Although coordination with foreign initiatives looks worse and it was not so successful, also within the European Union the coordination failed. And this resulted in situations where, for example, some museums received aid from multiple sources while others are neglected, or some objects are scanned in 3D new technology and some others are neglected. Next thing very important in providing effective assistance is to maintain the direct contacts with Ukrainian partners and listen what they need. This allows for customized assistance and also partnership relationships free from paternalism. Also, it's important to establish a safe space for meetings and for sharing experience. And I want to highlight here that we can also learn from Ukrainians who are acquiring, despite the very tragic of the situation, a very unique experience that can be incorporated into the security plans in EU countries, into security plans of cultural institutions. In the case of crisis, not only war, but also natural disasters, for example. And additionally, Polish experience allows us to observe that state institutions have great resources, they have great opportunities for action, but they depend on political will, so they are very sensitive for changes in power. And this is well illustrated by the example of the Ukrainian Heritage Rescue Project. It was a big project based on memorandum between the Polish and the then Ukrainian Ministers of Culture, Piotr Gliński and Oleksandr Tkachenko, but they are no longer in power. And this memorandum has not been extended by their successors. And although there is a team in Poland and in Ukraine who want to act, it is not possible to continue it. So I think it's worth taking a closer look to initiatives based on direct contact between museums and between cultural institutions. I believe that especially museums are good places to help because they are rooted in locality, but also they operate at the very international level, and they can facilitate the delivery of material aid, but also development of projects related to heritage protection and heritage popularization, but also education and post-conflict reconstruction in the future, hopefully.
Before moving to the next question about your research on museums and museums in Ukraine in particular, I also wanted to ask you, from what you describe, it sounds like people working in the sphere of cultural heritage, history, museums in Poland really had to mobilize a lot of resources and learn a lot in this last almost 3 years. Ukrainian doctors, for example, surgeons working in the war field, of course, now also more on demand from other countries to learn from their experiences, to work in these extreme conditions. Would you say that this experience for Polish specialists also helped them to be seen as more senior, more expert among other European colleagues? Do other European countries now actually understand that they have a lot to learn from people working in the Polish cultural sector?
We discussed it during the conference, and the visibility of Polish actions are not as good. And it's also a fact that Poland must be more confident in bringing this experience on the light. We have some kind of experience, but they are not shared in this broader European context.
I hope that our podcast will be a small contribution into highlighting all this effort and work. You are working on the museums that are operating in extreme context as Russia's war in Ukraine, among other. I wanted to ask you, so what are among the most obvious ones, of course, the danger of being bombed, but also what are other challenges and what are maybe opportunities that new digital era opens for museums in the context of military conflict and the war?
I want to stress that museums and their role in modern societies have evolved in recent decades. Museums are more than just places where objects and collections are stored and displayed. They have recognized social importance in education, for example, and they remain engaged civil actors, also in the cases of crises like wars, but also the climate changes and the migration crisis. Also, now more and more often museums share authority with visitors, enabling them to co-create meanings and to influence museum displays and museum representations. And social media and digital media are essential here, since through social network sites visitors can ask questions and they can provide feedback on exhibitions. So we can say that new technologies can facilitate the democratization of the museum space and more visitor-centered approach. And it was exactly something that attracted me to Ukrainian museums when I was at the beginning of my research, because after the Revolution of Dignity, there was a huge museum boom in Ukraine, and Ukrainian museums emerged as an important actor in civil transformation of the country. I focused on the museum project that dealt with the recent history of Ukraine. So at that time it was the Revolution of Dignity in 2014 and war in Donbass that we can consider as a first phase of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And I noticed that these were very vibrant spaces of co-creation of memory of this unfolding history, but also working on personal and collective trauma in Ukrainian society. Of course, now the situation is different and museums are fighting for survival, also as institutions, as the personnel, as staff, but some museums are also joining the fight for the country, and it's another issue that is very interesting to me.
Thank you so much, and I will push you further and will ask you to give some more concrete examples maybe of some cases of Ukrainian museums, and you were also mentioning before to me the role of women and women scholars in this creation of memory politics, especially in the times of war. You mentioned the example of Olha Honchar Museum. Maybe you could talk more about that and how they adapt now to mobilize support for Ukraine during the Russia's invasion.
Yes, I don't take this gender perspective in my research, so I don't know statistics, but it's true that a lot of museum workers and cultural institution workers in Ukraine are women, and they are very active in these actions to preserve cultural heritage during the Russian invasion. Olga Hontar is the director of the Museum of the Totalitarian Regimes in Lviv, and she created that initiative exactly 1 week after the start of Russia's full-scale invasion. And this initiative is quite unique because it focuses primarily on people, not on objects. Her idea was to support museum workers who stay in Ukraine and who still continue to work in Ukrainian museums, also under occupation, so in very harsh conditions. This is something that is often omitted in other initiatives that focus on heritage itself. Also, another direction of activity within this initiative, it is called Wounded Culture, and its main task is to document the history of museum workers and their heroic work to safeguard Ukrainian cultural heritage.
Thank you so much for all this interesting information, and I look forward to read more works of yours and learn more about what's going on both in this Ukrainian-Polish cooperation and harsh conditions. My last questions would be, what inspiration or what lessons in these tough times can actually museums around the world take from Ukraine and from Poland, especially in terms of digital engagement, online engagement, but also maybe some other lessons?
Yeah, at least creating digital lists of all objects in museum would facilitate the evacuation if needed. And it's also important that security plans in the event of crisis are created earlier, not only after the crisis began. And it's not only about the war, but also a different kind of crisis. I believe it's also important to learn from the Ukrainian experience that museums can serve as a crucial site to resistance, but also to building community resilience in the face of war. And I believe they will be also very important places in the future post-war reconstruction and renovation.
Let's hope for that, and also let's hope that the work of people who put so much effort into preserving this cultural heritage in both countries will be really appreciated and seen. And on this, we will finish our episode of podcast. Thank you so much, Elżbieta, and we look forward to welcoming you here again with your new research pieces and have more discussions.
Okay, thank you very much.